Tonight, let's dim the lights, close your eyes, and imagine this. You live in a world where there are no cameras, no perfect mirrors, no drugstore makeup. There are no cell phone, no social media, no beauty salon. But still, her beauty can kill you. An innocent look, an untimely laugh, the wrong color in your hair, the lightness of your walk. Yes, all of this can be used as evidence against you. Proof of what? That you are not from here, that there is something strange about you, that perhaps the devil himself has touched your skin. Today, you can look in the mirror and wish for fuller lips, longer eyelash, clearer or tanned skin. But there was a time not so long ago when wanting to be beautiful meant wanting to be judged, and often being burned alive. You are about to plunge into a dark time, an era when beauty was not celebrated. It was feared. An era when being beautiful was almost the same as being cursed. This story is not about aesthetic. It's about survival. About women who hid their faces in soot, who shaved their own hair, who turned off their own light so as not to be devoured by ignorance. Tonight, we will walk through the cold halls of castle, hear the whispers in the villages, and spy the fear hidden behind the veils. We will encounter silenced voices, accusing eyes, and broken hearts. And perhaps, at the end of this journey, you will understand why, even today, feminine beauty still causes discomfort. And why, even in 2025, there are women erasing their essence to fit into a world that still fears shine. Before we begin, if you like stories that no one dares to tell, and diving into the forgotten part of history, subscribe to the channel now, activate the bell, and leave a comment. Where in the world are you listening to this story from tonight? Now take a deep breath, let go of the past, and come with me to a time when beauty was the cruelest sentence of all. Close your eyes and try to imagine a world where you've never truly seen your own face. Not in detail, not clearly, not with certainty. That was the Middle Ages for nearly everyone. Mirrors, as we know them, were rare, expensive, and often distorted. Only the wealthiest had access to polished metal surfaces or blown glass that could mimic a reflection. Even then, what they saw was dim, blurry, and deceiving. Most women understood their appearance not through their own eyes, but through the gaze of others, and that gaze was rarely innocent. To be noticed was dangerous. To be admired was even worse. A compliment could be the first breath of a rumor. And a rumor, in medieval villages and courts, traveled faster than disease. A woman who heard whispers about her eyes being too piercing, or her lips too red, would begin to wonder, am I in danger? The mirror became a symbol of sin. Church leaders preached that vanity was a pathway to corruption. A woman who longed to see her own beauty was suspected of pride, seduction, and even witchcraft. She sees too much, they'd say. She must be hiding something. In some region, mirrors were banned entirely for women. They were accused of feeding female temptation, of stirring impure thoughts, of distracting from a life of obedience. Imagine never seeing your face but being punished for how others reacted. The mirror became a fantasy, a forbidden object, a portal to danger. Among the nobility, handheld mirrors made of polished bronze or silver were passed from mother to daughter. They were objects of quiet power, often hidden in embroidered pouches or tucked beneath layers of silk. To glimpse your own face was to glimpse your fate. One story tells of a merchant's daughter who received a mirror as a gift. She used it daily to braid her hair and adjust her veil. One day, a neighbor accused her of staring too long into it. That single accusation was enough to drag her before the local bishop, who claimed she had been communing with her reflection, a phrase they used when suggesting a woman spoke to demons. In truth, she was just a girl trying to understand herself in a world that refused to let her. There's something haunting about the idea of being seen more by others than by yourself, of learning who you are through the desires, fears, and judgments of strangers. In the medieval mind, beauty was not yours to claim. It was a threat to be tamed, a danger to be denied, or worse, a curse to be punished. The mirror in those centuries didn't reflect reality. It reflected suspicion. And for many women, that was the beginning of the end. In the medieval world, your skin was more than just your covering. It was your destiny. And if it happened to be pale to pale, you might as well have painted a target on your face. Fair skin was coveted and cursed all at once. To the nobility, it signaled purity, high birth, and a life sheltered from the sun. But to the people watching from the shadows, it was often a sign of corruption, indulgence, or something darker. The ideal of pale beauty did not come without a price. In an age when medicine was superstition and suspicion was law, being too pale could mean you were hiding something. Maybe you were hiding disease. Maybe you were using unnatural substance. Maybe you were simply too beautiful for your own good. Women went to terrifying lengths to maintain this deadly beauty. Crushed pearls, white lead, and vinegar were smeared across faces to achieve a ghost-like complexion. The whiter the skin, the closer you appeared to nobility. But this illusion slowly poisoned the flesh. Lead-based creams caused the skin to crack, blister, and bleed. Yet the pain was seen as a small price for survival in a world where appearance dictated safety. It was worse during plagues, when death came knocking door to door. Paleness was no longer fashionable. It became suspicious. If your skin looked too healthy or too bright in the midst of sickness, you might be accused of sorcery. How else could one survive so untouched, so pristine, when entire villages rotted around them? The records speak of a woman who was envied for her flawless skin. She sold herbs in the market, and her cheeks never flushed, not even in winter. Whispers began to grow. Some said she used the blood of infants. Others claimed she slept in graveyards to preserve her youth. In truth, she covered her freckles with ashes and washed in goat's milk. But facts never mattered much in a time ruled by fear. Her beauty was not a blessing. It was a beacon, and it led her straight to the stake. There was a terrible irony at the heart of it all. The very look that was admired in paintings and poetry was the same look that could get you tortured or executed. Beauty was seen as something suspicious unless it could be explained by wealth or lineage. If you were poor and beautiful, that was enough to be dangerous. The racism embedded in this obsession with fairness was not spoken aloud, but it was practiced. Darker-skinned women, those who worked in fields, who bore the sun's kisses on their arms and faces, were seen as less divine, less pure, less human. The pale were worshipped or burned. The dark were ignored or enslaved. The scale of cruelty had no end. It was a world where your skin could betray you before you even opened your mouth. A world where being born with the wrong glow could cost you your life. Imagine being punished not for something you did, but for the way someone looked at you. In the Middle Ages, a woman's beauty was not only admired, it was feared. And in that fear, it became criminal. The concept of female seduction was not seen as an art or a charm. It was treated as evidence of wickedness, of manipulation, of demonic influence. A beautiful woman who walked past a group of men and caused one of them to stumble in thought or speech could be accused of sorcery. If she smiled too gently, if her eyes lingered too long, if her lips were red without the help of berries, the conclusion was almost always the same. She must be using her body as a trap. She must be possessed. She must be punished. There are records of women brought before inquisitors simply for causing discomfort in the hearts of men. A nobleman confesses to lust. The church does not question his self-control. Instead, it turns to the woman. What were you wearing? Did you lower your eyes when he spoke? Did you touch your hair in a seductive way? The burden of sin always fell upon her shoulders. In one village, a peasant girl was sentenced to death because a baron claimed he dreamed of her 3 nights in a row. That was all it took. They said her spirit had bewitched him. Her presence had lured him into temptation. Never mind that she barely spoke. Never mind that she kept to herself. Her silence became mystery. Her mystery became danger. The archetype of the femme fatale did not begin in novels. It was born in whispers, in firelight, in courtrooms soaked with fear. Men who desired but could not possess blamed the women for their longing. And the church, desperate to contain any loss of control, joined the hunt. Women learned to dim their light. They wrapped their bodies in layers of cloth. They avoided perfume, avoided mirrors, avoided laughter, because any sign of confidence was seen as seduction, and seduction was a sin. To exist in a beautiful body was like walking through a minefield blindfolded. Any step could lead to ruin. Any compliment could be a curse in disguise. There was no protection, no defense, no explanation that could undo the suspicion. A woman could be as devout as a nun and still be labeled a temptress. Her beauty spoke louder than her prayers. Her grace became a weapon, not in her hands, but in the eyes of those who watched her from the shadows. In the end, the sentence was not always death. Sometimes it was exile. Sometimes it was forced marriage. Sometimes it was simply the slow erosion of spirit, the quiet disappearance of self. As the world demanded she stop being a flame and become a shadow. There was a time when beauty itself was considered unnatural. A time when being too attractive meant that you had not been blessed by God, but marked by the devil. In the medieval world, physical perfection did not inspire admiration. It sparked fear, suspicion, and spiritual panic. The idea that a woman could be beautiful without noble blood, without expensive oils or luxurious, was simply unthinkable. If her cheeks held a natural glow, if her hair shone in the moonlight, if her eyes seemed to hold a deeper light, then surely, they said, she was not of this world. She was being aided by dark forces. Her beauty could not be explained, so it had to be condemned. Inquisition records describe women examined for unnatural loveliness. Their bodies were searched for what priests called the devil's mark. A freckle, a mole, a birthmark in the wrong place could be used as evidence. Some were pricked with needles, some burned with hot irons, all to see if they would flinch, if their skin would bleed, if they were human after all. One woman, known only by her baptism name, Isabeau, was accused of eternal youth. She worked at an inn, and for more than 20 years, travellers swore she never aged. They whispered that she sold her soul for beauty, that she drank the tears of widows, that her shadow vanished at dusk. The truth was simpler. She used herbs and honey. She rested. She smiled. But simplicity had no place in a world ruled by fear. The more radiant a woman appeared, the more likely she was to be watched. And the more she was watched, the more she risked. Beauty was seen as a mask, a trick of the devil to lure men into sin, to distract the holy, to disrupt the order of things. Many churches taught that Eve's fall was caused by her charm, that beauty had always been a doorway to ruin. So women who stood out, women who glowed, women whose presence stirred something in the hearts of others, were not celebrated. They were studied, judged, hunted. The cruelty of these beliefs went beyond physical torture. They stripped women of the right to feel at home in their own skin. If you looked too good, you were lying. If you aged too slowly, you were hiding. If people admired you, you were dangerous. Your body was not your own. It belonged to the court, to the clergy, to the crowd, and they would decide whether it was holy or cursed. The tragedy of those years still echoes in silent ways today. The fear of being too much, the need to explain your beauty, the shame of being seen. Because once upon a time, the devil did not come in disguise. He came, they believed, through a woman's face. In the quiet corridors of medieval castles, scent was not just a luxury. It was a weapon, and for women, it was a double-edged one. A fragrance could elevate your presence or seal your doom. A dab of oil on the wrist, a trace of sweetness on the neck, and suddenly, questions began to swirl like smoke. What was she hiding? Who was she trying to seduce? What if the perfume was not perfume at all? Cosmetics were a dark art in the eyes of the medieval world. The line between beauty and sorcery was so thin it often disappeared. To wear colour on your lips was to invite suspicion. To darken your lashes or sweeten your skin meant you were masking something dangerous. The most popular ingredients in those days were not only toxic, but terrifying. Lead was used for whitening the skin. Mercury softened the texture. Arsenic added glow. Belladonna made the eyes look large and luminous, but also blurred the vision and damaged the brain. Women applied these poisons daily, believing they were perfecting their looks. But perfection came at a cost. Some began to lose their hair, others their sanity. Yet the practice continued, because to appear flawless was safer than being questioned for looking tired or dull. Ironically, it was this very effort to fit in, to appear desirable, that made them targets. There are stories of noblewomen accused of murder simply for wearing scent during a banquet. A single guest falls ill, and suspicion turns toward the woman with the sweetest fragrance. The idea of a perfumed poison began to spread. Fear twisted beauty into betrayal. It was whispered that a kiss could kill, that a handkerchief pressed against the skin might carry death beneath its folds. One of the most haunting tales is of a lady who gifted her servant a small pot of rouge. The servant used it once and collapsed within the hour. The pot was taken as evidence, though no test existed to prove guilt. The lady was taken away in the night, never seen again. Her only crime was carrying something that smelled too lovely to be innocent. In public, women stopped carrying scented oils. They avoided makeup that stood out. Some burned their perfumes rather than be found with them. Others were accused of witchcraft for having fragrant herbs like lavender or thyme in their homes. Beauty routines became acts of rebellion. Survival required invisibility. Behind each painted lip and powdered cheek was a risk. Behind each elegant bottle was a fear. A woman could not be both beautiful and trusted. The more refined she looked, the more people believed she had something to hide. In a world where everything about a woman was scrutinized, even the air around her became suspect. The scent she wore was not just a trail of roses or musk. It was a question, a warning, a story waiting to be rewritten as accusation. And in many cases, it was the scent of her own destruction. There is a cruel irony that unfolds in the shadows of medieval history. A woman who lived her life hiding her beauty survived could, in death, finally be allowed to shine. When the body grew cold and the breath ceased, that was when her face was touched by gentle hands. Her hair was combed, her cheeks were powdered. Her lips, once feared, were painted soft with color. Only then, in stillness, was her beauty considered safe. The medieval obsession with purity and virtue found strange expression in death rituals, especially for young women. The corpse was treated not with horror, but with reverence. Beauty in life was seen as a threat, but beauty in death became a symbol of divine favor, a sign that the soul had departed clean, untouched by sin, untarnished by the flesh. Some were laid to rest in silk robes with lace gloves, hands folded as if in prayer. Others were sealed in glass coffins, their faces preserved with wax to maintain the illusion of perfection. Saints and martyrs, even girls who died from illness or childbirth, were often made to look like sleeping angels. The same face that drew suspicion while breathing became an object of devotion after the final breath. Churches displayed these women like relics, their bones dressed in gold, their skulls crowned with flowers, their smiles frozen in gentle silence. For the living, it was a spectacle. For the dead, a peace that had never been granted in life. One of the most heartbreaking accounts is of a young woman who was burned for witchcraft at only 16. But years later, when her name was cleared by a bishop, her remains were exhumed and reburied with honor. Her bones were dressed in velvet, her story rewritten as that of a misunderstood soul. A girl too good, too pure, too beautiful for the world that had condemned her. There is something deeply unsettling about a culture that only honored female beauty when it could no longer move or speak, when it no longer laughed, sang, or questioned. Only in silence was it celebrated. Only in death was it finally safe. It speaks to a darker truth that still lingers in quiet corners of society, that a woman must erase herself to be adored, that her voice must vanish for her face to be seen as holy, that her softness must be lifeless before it is called sacred. To be beautiful and alive was dangerous. To be beautiful and dead was divine. This contradiction lived in the heart of medieval ideals. A world where women were only allowed to glow once they could no longer burn. In the Middle Ages, beauty was not only feared, it was locked away, hidden behind stone walls, buried beneath layers of fabric, confined within rules written by fathers, priests, and kings. If a woman was considered too beautiful, she was often not praised. She was protected, at least that is what they claimed. But in truth, she was imprisoned. Families would remove young girls from public life the moment their looks began to blossom. A smile noticed at the market, a stranger's lingering gaze, whispers among neighbors. That was all it took. She would be sent to a convent, married off before her first blood, wrapped in veils that covered not only her hair, but her identity. Beauty became a liability, and in many cases, a burden to the men around her. To avoid scandal or jealousy, some fathers arranged weddings for their daughters as young as 12. A child would leave behind her dolls and toys, only to become a bride to a man twice her age. It was not love, it was protection disguised as transaction. In noble courts, women were told to remain unseen, their voices softened, their movements controlled. A glance too direct or address too bright could cause rumors that ruined reputations. Beauty had to be contained like a flame, always close to being extinguished. One story tells of a girl raised in silence. Her face was said to be so radiant that her mother covered every mirror in the house. Guests were not allowed to see her without permission. She was never taught to read, never allowed to dance, never walked alone in a garden. When she turned 15, she was married to a foreign noble she had never met. Her only crime had been the shape of her face. Veils were not just fabric. They were symbols of control. They turned the living into ghosts. When a woman wore a veil, she became less herself and more an idea, a figure to be moved, traded, protected, or punished. Behind the veil, she could cry and no one would see. She could scream and no one would hear. There were women who tried to rebel. Some cut their own hair. Others stained their skin or covered themselves in ash to appear sick or disfigured. A few ran away, disguising themselves as boys to escape the fate their beauty had carved. But those were rare stories, often ending in tragedy or silence. The world feared what it could not control, and a beautiful woman was the most uncontrollable force of all. So they did not teach her to lead, to learn, or to speak. They taught her to disappear, to shrink, to become a memory before she could fully live. And so behind the stone walls and thick veils, 1,000 lives were paused, 1,000 voices muted, not because they did anything wrong, but because they dared to be radiant in a world built to dim them. There is a kind of silence that does not come from lack of sound, but from fear of making any. In the medieval world, a woman's voice was not only discouraged, it was feared. And if that voice happened to be soft, melodic, or full of joy, it became something far more dangerous. A beautiful laugh could cost a woman her life. Music flowed naturally from the souls of many women. They sang while washing clothes, while brushing hair, while comforting children. Their voices filled empty rooms and cold courtyards with warmth, but that warmth, in the eyes of medieval men, was seductive, suspicious, unholy. The church often taught that the female voice was a law, that singing, especially outside the walls of prayer, was a temptation placed by dark forces. Some priests claimed that women who sang were trying to draw men away from their virtue. Others said that a high-pitched laugh echoed too closely to the laughter of witches. Laws were not always written, but customs were enforced with precision. Girls were taught to whisper, to speak only when spoken to lower their tone, not only in volume but in spirit. Joy was not something to be displayed in public, especially not through laughter. There were horrifying accounts of women who were punished for the way their voices affected others. A girl who sang near a well and was later accused of enchanting a merchant who fell ill. A widow whose soothing lullaby was called a spell. A group of sisters who harmonized too beautifully during a feast and were forced to take a vow of silence. And then there was the laugh. A soft laugh, a sharp one, a breathless giggle. Anything that suggested pleasure, delight, or confidence could be twisted into evidence. If a man lost his senses around her, it was her fault. If he dreamed of her voice, she must have bewitched him. In one chilling case, a woman was said to laugh at the wrong moment during a sermon. She was dragged outside and accused of mocking the holy word. Witnesses claimed her laughter pierced the air like an arrow, that it made men shift in their seats, that it caused a child to cry. They called it a demon's laugh. They called it evil. They never called it human. To prevent temptation, some women were mutilated, their tongues cut, their teeth broken, their throats scarred, not because of anything they said, but because of how they sounded when they dared to live. What was once a gift became a curse. The sound of a woman's joy, her grief, her wonder, her presence, had to be contained. Behind laws, behind stone, behind silence. In a world built on fear, even the gentlest melody could become a threat. A woman's laugh, once full of sunlight, had to be buried under shadows. In the medieval world, hair was never just hair. It was language. It was power. It was danger. Flowing locks were not simply strands of beauty, but whispers of rebellion, symbols of seduction, and marks of spiritual defiance. The way a woman wore her hair could determine how she was treated, judged, and ultimately remembered. Long hair was considered both sacred and profane. In paintings, saints were often shown with veils and modest coverings, but even beneath those layers, there was the implication of purity linked, untouched, uncut hair. At the same time, if a living woman allowed her hair to cascade freely in public, that act alone could be read as a cry for attention, a cry for sin, a temptation offered without words. Hair color mattered too. Red was feared. It was said to reflect fire, lust, and unclean spirits. Blonde was coveted, yet condemned, viewed as the chosen shade of enchantresses. And black, especially when glossy, stirred fear of hidden mysteries. In every shade, hair carried a risk. Some women were accused of bewitching others simply through the way their hair moved. A gust of wind lifting curls into the air could be seen as nature obeying the witch. A braid too intricate could be proof of vanity or sorcery. If she touched her hair while speaking, it meant she was casting a spell. If her hair fell in waves around her shoulders, it meant she was seducing the room. Punishment came in many forms: public shaming, head shaving, cold iron scissors slicing away identity strand by strand. In some towns, accused women were marched through the streets with their hair hacked unevenly, heads bare under the open sky. It was humiliation as justice. Beauty turned into crime. Hair was also a spiritual battlefield. Nuns were required to cut theirs to sever earthly pride. Wives were told to cover theirs to preserve family honor. Daughters were warned never to let theirs grow to wild, because wild hair meant wild thoughts, and wild thoughts could spark revolution. There was even a belief that demons could nest in hair, that it acted like a net, attracting unseen spirits. So to protect themselves, some women burned the ends of their strands. Others buried cut hair in sacred ground. A few went so far as to never let their hair grow beyond the shoulder, hoping to stay invisible to temptation itself. But in all of this, the truth remained unspoken. Hair was feared because it was beautiful, because it moved when everything else stayed still, because it reminded the world that women, no matter how tightly controlled, still carried something untamable. In a time when the body was owned by law, the voice was silenced by threat, and the gaze was trained to the floor, hair remained the final whisper of freedom. And for that, many were punished, not for what they did, but for what the wind revealed. There is a kind of courage that does not wear armor or wield swords. It hides in the shadows with ash on its face and dirt beneath its fingernails. In the Middle Ages, Some women discovered that the only way to live was to disappear, and for the most beautiful among them, that meant destroying what made them visible, their own faces. In villages where hunger whispered through every home, where labor bent backs and chapped hands, beauty was not celebrated. It was hunted. A young woman with soft skin or symmetrical features could draw the wrong kind of attention, not just from wandering soldiers or drunkards at the inn, but from neighbors, from priests, from anyone desperate to shift blame or suspicion. So they learned. They smeared soot on their cheeks. They rubbed mud into their skin. They burned their arms slightly so the redness would distract from their eyes. Some blackened their teeth to make their smiles less inviting. Others filed them into points, hoping to appear cursed rather than desirable. There are stories of women who intentionally broke their noses, who scraped their own faces with sharpened stones, not out of madness, but out of desperation. Better to be overlooked than to be desired. Better to be feared than accused. Beauty was a light, and in those dark times, any light could attract fire. A small group of peasant women in the colder regions formed what some called silent circle. They taught each other how to mask their features using herbs and smoke. Not cosmetics, but camouflage. Their gatherings were secret. Their rituals quiet. Their goal was simple, to survive the gaze. One woman, known only by the nickname Hollow Eye, was said to have scorched the sides of her face with boiling water after a nobleman tried to take her by force. She survived, but her skin never healed the same. And yet she walked freely after that. No more stares, no more threats. Her scars became her armor. These acts were never recorded in the songs of knights or the scrolls of kings, but they were heroic. In a world that worshipped control, choosing to mar your own reflection was the ultimate rebellion. Not because you hated yourself, but because you refused to be devoured by a culture that never saw you as human. Behind every face smeared with soot was a story, a warning, a life protected through loss. These women did not vanish because they were weak. They vanished because that was the only way to remain whole. To hide beauty was to protect life. And in that terrible truth, we see the deepest wound of all. A world that forced its daughters to undo themselves just to stay. There was a time when something as simple as a kiss could set the world around you on fire. Not metaphorically, not romantically, but literally. In the Middle Ages, a single moment of affection, a brief touch of lips, could unravel a life and light a pyre. The act of kissing was not seen as innocent. It was not a gentle exchange between lovers. It was dangerous, suspicious, often criminal. A kiss could be called an invitation to sin, a spell in disguise, a trap set by the devil in a woman's mouth. If two people were caught kissing without permission, the blame rarely fell on the man. The woman, regardless of her intentions, was questioned first. What potion did she use? What charm did she whisper? How did her lips pull him in so completely? She was no longer a person. She was an enchantment, and enchantments had to be broken. There are chilling stories of women executed for a single kiss. One such tale tells of a girl who kissed a soldier behind a chapel wall. Someone saw. Word spread. When he became ill weeks later, the town decided she had cursed him through that kiss. They said her breath had stolen his strength. Her lips had drained his soul. They tied her to the post at dawn. The kiss was viewed not only as physical but spiritual theft. Some believed that a woman could pull a man's spirit from his body through touch, that her mouth, warm and soft, held powers forbidden by heaven. The church encouraged this fear. Priests warned that affection outside of wedlock was not just immoral, but infernal. A kiss was not passion, it was possession. In noble courts, secret kisses were common, but when exposed, they came with devastating consequences. Lovers were separated, women banished or cloistered, some forced into silence, others into graves. The shame belonged to her, always her. Even among married couples, affection was heavily regulated. A kiss was allowed only under certain conditions. Anything else raised suspicion. The woman could be accused of lust, of disobedience, of leading her husband into carnal weakness. And if he turned violent, that too was her fault. There was a belief that witches kissed the devil during their rituals. This idea bled into how society saw women's affection. A loving gesture could be twisted into an oath of darkness. A kiss was no longer a connection between two souls. It became a crime written on the mouth. What should have been the most human expression of care became a mark of guilt. Lips that could offer comfort, intimacy, and trust were seen as tools of seduction and deceit. The kiss, stripped of tenderness, became the trigger of fear. And for many women, that fear ended in silence. In exile, in fire, in times of war, the most beautiful were not always the most protected. They were the most offered. In the medieval world, a woman's beauty could become her price. Her value was not measured in wisdom or skill, but in how pleasing her face seemed to those in power.
And when kingdoms clashed, alliances formed, or peace needed to be bought, it was the beautiful women who were given away.
These women were not soldiers, yet they were traded like spoils, promised as tokens of peace.
Dressed in silk and fear, marched through foreign gates as part of treaties they had never seen, negotiated by men they would never meet again.
Their names disappeared into the pages of political history. Their pain was never recorded.
A noble daughter, chosen for her delicate features, might be sent to marry a warlord twice her age. A girl from a quiet village, noticed once by a passing knight, could find herself handed over as a symbol of surrender. It did not matter what she wanted.
Her beauty belonged to the state, to the strategy, to the silence between battles.
Sometimes the arrangement came with ceremony, trumpets, feasts, blessings from priests who spoke of duty and divine will.
But underneath the gold and lace was a heart that did not beat for peace. It beat for survival.
And it beat alone. One tragic story tells of a woman sent to a conquering army to secure the safety of her city.
She wore a crown of roses. Her face remained calm as she walked through the enemy gates.
She never returned.
Her city was spared, but she became a ghost. Her beauty brought a moment of safety, but cost a lifetime of freedom.
Even within kingdoms, beauty was used to manipulate politics. A ruler would parade his daughters to visiting nobles, hoping one would catch a favorable eye. If she did, a marriage was arranged. If she did not, she was hidden away. Her worth existed only in the eyes of others. This was not love. It was economy, and the currency was skin, eyes, hair, youth. Beauty became a diplomatic tool, a bridge between enemies.
A pawn placed on a board where no one asked if she wanted to play.
Some women try to escape. There are records of noble daughters pretending to be ill, covering their faces in ash, pulling out their hair, hoping to appear too damaged for exchange.
Some were successful.
Most were not.
Their fate was sealed the moment someone said she is lovely enough. We speak often of warriors and kings, but rarely of those whose beauty served as a silent treaty.
They were sent not with weapons,
but with flowers, not with armor, but with trembling hands.
They carried no banners, only themselves, and the unbearable weight of being born beautiful in a world that viewed beauty as a transaction. There was a time when the way you held a cup could condemn you, when the simple motion of brushing your hand against fabric or lifting a spoon was enough to stir fear in the hearts of those watching. In the medieval world, grace was not elegant. It was evidence.
And for many women, it became a reason to be punished.
A soft gesture, a careful step, a tilt of the wrist that revealed delicacy or control. These movements, when performed by women, were interpreted not as natural expressions, but as calculated seduction.
Society believed that women used their bodies not to exist, but to manipulate.
That the way they moved was part of a greater plan to distract, to tempt, to destroy.
In court records and inquisitorial testimony, there are descriptions of women accused of witchcraft simply for touching objects with what was called unnatural care.
A chalice lifted too gently.
A book opened too slowly.
A glance paired with a small movement of the hand.
These moments were written down,
analyzed, turned into crimes. It was not about what they touched. It was about how. A woman who moved with confidence or fluidity was considered threatening. Her grace became a mirror in which others saw their own discomfort, and instead of asking why her presence unsettled them, they turned her into the problem. In one particularly disturbing case, a woman was seen wiping her hands on a cloth during a gathering. A priest noted the motion as sensual. He claimed she was casting a spell with the rhythm of her fingers. She was questioned, shamed.
Her explanation was simple. Her hands were cold. Another account tells of a merchant's wife who poured wine for guests during a feast. Her movements were smooth, refined.
Too refined, according to one nobleman.
He accused her of stirring impure thoughts with the way she poured.
She was banned from future events. Her husband lost standing in the town.
Her hands became the center of a scandal.
Over time, many women began to limit their movement. They warped with stiffness.
They avoided eye contact.
They hesitated before touching anything, not because they were guilty, but because they were afraid of what their gestures might say without their permission. This fear bled into generation.
Mothers taught daughters to make themselves small, to move without drawing attention, to hold their hands together when not in use,
to keep their eyes lowered,
to remain invisible even when present.
And yet, grace cannot be entirely erased. It lingers in the smallest of motions.
A hand brushing hair behind the ear.
A sigh before speech.
A pause before offering a gift. These moments, so human and so gentle, were once seen as fire. And for women in the Middle Ages, fire was never just warmth.
It was warning.
To touch was to risk. To move with beauty was to provoke suspicion, and to carry grace was to carry the weight of constant misinterpretation. There is a kind of beauty that does not ask to be noticed. It simply exists, quiet, unaware, soft as a breeze before the storm.
In the Middle Ages, this kind of beauty was the most dangerous of all, not because it was flaunted, but because it was not. Innocence, when wrapped in grace, became something terrifying to those who needed control.
Young girls, often no more than children, would begin to glow with the natural light of youth.
A blush in the cheek, a brightness in the eyes, a smile that held no intention beyond joy. And still, these traits were seen as signs of temptation, as if the devil himself had chosen their purity as his mask.
These girls had no idea. They played in gardens.
They laughed too loudly. They asked questions with open hearts. But the world around them did not see curiosity. It saw threat.
Men who felt attraction to their innocence blamed the girl. They said she bewitched them without knowing. They said her smile was a trap. The church warned that even children could become tools of the enemy, that the devil often entered the world through what appeared most pure.
This idea poisoned entire generations. Beauty became dangerous the moment it bloomed, and the one who carried it often did not live long enough to understand what it meant. One of the most heartbreaking stories tells of a girl named Elira. She was 14.
Her voice was like birdsong, her presence soft as candlelight. The townspeople began to whisper.
A merchant claimed she made his dreams restless.
A friar said her laugh unsettled him during prayer. Elira was accused of being unaware of her own power.
She was questioned.
She cried.
She was burned.
She never even kissed anyone.
In another village, a child barely past 10 was hidden away by her mother after neighbors began to comment on her beauty.
They said her eyes were too blue, that she must be blessed or cursed.
The mother, terrified, stained her daughter's face with coal dust, told her never to smile in public, told her to walk with her head down. The girl obeyed, and still people watched.
It was not what these children did.
It was what others saw. Projection turned into persecution. The world could not tolerate light it did not understand.
So it tried to extinguish it.
There were no protections for these girls, no laws that recognized innocence as sacred. They were alone in a world that expected them to be both invisible and perfect.
And when they failed to do the impossible, they were punished for being too alive. The beauty that does not know it exists is perhaps the most painful of all,
because it is not performance. It is not strategy. It is simply being.
And in a time that feared anything it could not control, that kind of being was enough to be erased.
The fires have gone out. The gallows are quiet. The cathedrals stand in silence, their stones soaked with centuries of forgotten cries. And yet, something lingers. An echo, a shadow, a trace of fear that still follows beauty through the streets of modern life.
The world no longer burns women for the shape of their eyes or the sound of their laughter, but it still punishes those who shine too brightly. The medieval fear of the beautiful woman did not vanish.
It evolved.
It learned new words. Instead of calling her a witch, she is called arrogant. Instead of accusing her of sorcery, they say she is manipulative.
If she wears color, she is seeking attention. If she stays quiet, she is cold. If she speaks, she is too much. The old patterns remain, dressed in new fabric.
In classrooms, young girls are told to tone it down. At work, women are advised to smile more, but not too much.
On the street, they are watched, followed, judged, just like their ancestors who walked with veils not to please God, but to survive mankind. We inherited more than we realized. The same fear that led priests to accuse women of enchanting with their voices now calls them unprofessional for expressing emotion.
The same suspicion that made kings imprison their daughters behind stone now asks women to dim their light in order to be liked.
And the same rage that once demanded flames now simply demands silence.
This story was never just about the past. It was never just about dresses and dungeons and whispered accusation. It is about the lingering discomfort society feels when a woman does not apologize for being luminous, when she walks into a room and takes up space, when she does not shrink. For generations, women have been taught to carry their beauty like a burden, to hide their power inside apologies, to make themselves small so others feel big.
But that lesson ends when we remember.
Remember the girls who smeared ash on their cheeks to live one more day.
Remember the women who sang once and never again.
Remember the mothers who braided their daughters' hair in secret, terrified of admiration.
Remember them not as victims, but as warnings carved in time.
We still build prisons for beautiful women.
They just look different now. They are digital, emotional, invisible,
and they are everywhere. But we also carry the key.
To admire without possessing, to witness without controlling,
to allow beauty to exist for its own sake, without suspicion, without punishment, without fear. This is not just history. This is a mirror, and it asks one quiet question. What kind of world do we create when we finally stop fearing women who shine?